We can take a seat down. Cool. It won't be this convoluted when we do a big presentation, but anyways. So a little bit about the timeline. In 2017, February, Enough is Enough, the Coalition for Police Reform released a report publicly looking at the Civilian Review Board process in Rochester, complaints of misconduct. Barbara Lack-Ware and I were the co-authors of the report. We looked at 15 years of annual reports between professional standards section, which is the internal affairs of the police, as well as the Civilian Review Board, the CRB, their annual reports. We found that out of over 15 years, 1,200 allegations of force, the chief of police sustained, well, let me back up a little bit. The Civilian Review Board sustained 5% of those complaints. PSS, the Internal Affairs, sustained 3% of those complaints. The chief of police, who has final determination over all complaints, sustained 2%. And 2% out of 1,200 represents 23 complaints, or 23 allegations, right, of force. Those 23 allegations led to 13 allegations of those 23 led to discipline. So it's even less than 2% regarding discipline. So this is a real problem. With folks in CPR and Enough is Enough, we came up with a proposed ordinance, the Police Accountability Board. And the Police Accountability Board essentially has 5 main points, right? Number one is we want it to be an independent agency of the City of Rochester, independent of the Rochester Police Department. We want it to have independent investigative authority to conduct its own investigations. We want it to have subpoena power. We want it to have disciplinary power, where the board would come up with a discipline. The chief could impose it. If the chief declines to impose it, the board could force the chief to do that. And that would be based on what's called the disciplinary matrix, which is like a schedule of punishment and increasing severity based on the number of sustained allegations of misconduct the officer has in their prior record. Was that 4? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so fifth one, last one. Fifth point is we are asking for the power to make this board an evaluator of sorts, to be able to review policies, procedures, patterns, and practices of the Rochester Police Department, and then from there recommend changes and have those changes implemented unless there's like sort of a counter offer presented by the department or the city. So that's the crux of what we're basically demanding. It was released. The report was released in February. Between February of 2007 and December of 2017. I'm sorry, February 2017. December 2017. We got over 75 letters of support. We got affected individuals to sign on. We also had, several. We shopped around the report to all these different organizations, over 100 organizations. We went to other cities. We talked about it, and City Council. We started meeting with City Council, and they were hesitant, but they listened. And we're still in negotiations and discussions with them about this process and the possibility of having a police accountability board. So in July of 2017, City Council contracted with an organization called the Center for Governmental Research. The Center for Governmental Research did an evaluation of how the process works for making a complaint against police, as well as sort of vetting our report. Their report was released at the end of February, or at the end of November, excuse me. And Enough is Enough started reading this report, going through it. We have a response which is going to be released a week from Tuesday, and there were some criticisms of that report. So where we are, so basically that's the timeline. We had a meeting yesterday with City Council, the new member of the president, the vice president, and the chair of the Public Safety Committee, and so we had a meeting with them yesterday. I think we thought about it, right? and we're going to move forward from there. So that's sort of the timeline of events as they've unfolded in a really slapdash kind of way, so I apologize about that. But the one thing I left out actually was in October of 2017, we spent 25 hours over that month, about 6 to 8 of us, and revised our ordinance because we realized that there were some issues with it, we revised it. And AJ is actually going to talk about that revised ordinance. So I'll switch over.
Okay, so as Ted sort of alluded to, we were looking for ways to improve the ordinance. We got to go to a conference out in Colorado for the National Association for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement and learned from some really knowledgeable people from all around the country about the best ways to improve, oversight systems. And so we did make some changes. And so let me just sort of briefly run down what our proposed ordinance sort of entails at this point. So Ted mentioned the sort of the powers that we're looking for, but just to explain that a little bit, to flesh those out a little bit more. So the main thing we're looking for is an independent investigation. That's one of the main things we're looking for, because the current system only allows for the Citizen Review Board to review internal investigations. So the only investigations that are performed is performed by the police department itself. They're the only ones who have access to all the evidence and witnesses. And they ultimately prepare a report. And so there's no real good way for the current system to conduct their own investigation or to gather evidence or to interview witnesses related to a complaint. So we want an independent investigation with subpoena power such that the board could issue subpoenas to compel the production of evidence and witnesses, and ultimately the investigation would be not based on just the Rochester Police Department's interpretation of things, but based on independent civilians' interpretation of things. So then they would be able to conduct hearings to actually hear the allegations of misconduct. There would be a panel that would oversee the hearing. They'd be able to hear from any interested party. And then they would ultimately make a finding with respect to whether or not the officer committed misconduct, and if so, what the discipline they would recommend. So that suggests also we're requesting disciplinary authority for the Police Accountability Board, because the way it currently stands, as Ted was mentioning, only the chief has the power to discipline, and he disciplines less than 2% of the instances in which there are allegations of misconduct. So there's discipline process currently is not working. And so, and as Ted mentioned, all the disciplinary decisions would be based on a disciplinary matrix, which sort of outlines exactly the range of punishments or sanctions that would be available depending on the severity of the infraction or in the number of times that this officer has previously been found guilty of other misconduct or infractions. So it will essentially create a predictable, fair, and transparent model for how officers are disciplined in the city of Rochester. Now also, just as an aside, as we learned in researching this issue, there are really only 2 other cities across the country that have models that are sort of similar to the one we're proposing. And that's in Oakland, California, and Newark, New Jersey. They're very new, and so we don't have a lot of good data yet about how effective those processes have been there. But if we were to actually get something done like what we want to get done, we would have one of the most progressive accountability systems in the country. So another really important last piece is, so all the other powers have sort of dealt with how we can deal with instances of misconduct when they arise. But we think another really important piece to have is we have to be able to deal with these systemic issues that give rise to misconduct in the first place. So again, as Ted was mentioning, I think one of the most important things we're asking for as well is someone who would have access to all of Rochester, all the RPD's policies and procedures. They could evaluate patterns and practices, and they could recommend changes to City Council based on their evaluation of how misconduct is being caused in the first place, if we can make changes to policies and procedures to prevent it. Okay, so now to get into a little bit more into the weeds about how the board is structured. So we envision the board as an 11-member board essentially, with there would be appointees, 4 from City Council, 1 from the mayor, and 6 community appointees. Now, the community appointees would be appointed via a process through what we call the Police Accountability Board Alliance. And the alliance is a collection of community groups who would nominate individuals to serve on the board, and ultimately City Council would appoint them. And the point of this is to make sure that we don't want just the people in power who have been in control of the system for a long time to be able to determine who's in control of the board. Ultimately, we want the community, and in particular, the areas of the community that are most heavily policed, we want those areas to have control over the accountability system. So we think that with the Police Accountability Board Alliance, that gives us our best shot at getting community control over the accountability board. Further, everyone on the board would receive training. As I've said, we've gone to a conference, and the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement has a lot of training opportunities regionally and across the country, online and in person, that we would be able to provide to members of the board. In addition, we've been in contact with New York City's Civilian Complaint Review Board, and they have some investigators and their Inspector General who said they'd be willing to talk to us and to train board members, if that were ever needed. Further, we would expect that the board to reflect the diversity of the community, as we've indicated. In the Police Accountability Board Alliance, one of its main goals would be making sure that the board itself is representative of the community, and to make sure that everyone has a say, and especially the stakeholders who are most heavily policed, that they have a say in how accountability is handled. We expect the board to have staff, including an executive director and a team of investigators. This is another really important point, because one of the ways that accountability systems across the country have failed, even when they're well-intentioned and to some extent well-designed, is when they're underfunded. And what happens is they don't hire enough investigators, they don't have enough staff to handle the volume of complaints that they receive. So what you have is people filing complaints, but then they have to wait months and months, if not years, to actually get those complaints investigated and adjudicated. We have a goal, we want all complaints to be investigated and adjudicated within 90 days. So what we're asking for is we want at least one investigator for every 100 officers to be able to handle the law with complaints coming in. So that's about 6 to 7 investigators. And with a staff of that size, we're hoping that we're going to get funding somewhere in the range of about 1% of the current police department budget. Now that's about $1 million, which is relatively small compared to the extremely inflated police department budget. But we think that's a very reasonable cost to pay for an accountability system that's effective. Now, further related to the cost is currently, over the past couple of years, the city has paid a little over $2 million for civil settlements and legal fees related to individuals suing the city related to officer misconduct. So we're hoping that if we have an effective oversight system, if we can terminate some of those problematic officers and really make sure that the department realizes that we're paying attention to these issues. You're not going to get away with some of the stuff you have been getting away with. We can actually reduce instances of misconduct and ultimately reduce the amount of civil lawsuits that are being filed against the city related to misconduct. So we think ultimately it will save money in that respect. So I think that's pretty much the overview of the revised ordinance. I guess just to lead into the next little tidbit. So as I mentioned with the Alliance, it's a group of community organizations coming together that are going to nominate people to serve on the Police Accountability Board. And now I believe Betty will come up and tell you a bit more about the Alliance and how it works.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
The investigators, when they do their investigating, is there going to be like a database so they can input that information so that everybody can see it?
So a couple things about that. So one, they will be keeping their own internal records related to the complaints they've evaluated, because one of the things that's going to determine discipline against an officer if they're found guilty of misconduct is whether or not they've previously been found guilty of misconduct. Mm-hmm. So if you keep doing the same things wrong over and over again, your punishment's going to get worse and worse until you're eventually terminated. So they will be keeping internal records. Now, in terms of the availability of those records to the public, now that's
not the public. I really meant the accountability.
Okay, yes, the accountability will have access. The accountability board will have access to everything. That does touch on just to give everyone a background on this. So public access to this touches on an aspect of state law, and that's Civil Rights Law 50A. And what that law says is that officer disciplinary records are not available to the public unless there's a court order. Now, that rule doesn't apply to agencies of city government in performance of their official functions. So the Police Accountability Board would have access to all records, just like the Syracuse Review Board, New York City Review Board has access to all such records. But the public, there is, at the state law level, which, that might be worth changing as well. But at this point, just focusing on Rochester, we would not have the ability just to, release publicly officer disciplinary
Okay, thank you.
Police Accountability Board Alliance was born out of the Police Accountability Board Organizing Committee, which was consisted of members of Enough is Enough, Facing Race, Embracing Equity, GRCC Faith in Action, Rock Acts, UCLM, and the Rochester City Clergy Caucus. And after the organizing committee did research and met for a year, a little over a year, it was decided that we needed to regroup. Hence, we became the Police Accountability Board Alliance. That alliance consists of all of the supporting organizations that, which is
Right after the 35.
right, about 35 organizations who are supporting the Police Accountability Board initiative. So these bylaws for the Police Accountability Board Alliance were born January 2018, is when they were finalized. We had a group from the Police Accountability Board Organizing Committee get together, they met, they shared ideas, and hence we have the bylaws. I'm not gonna read verbatim, I'm just gonna go through because I think Ted gave out copies. If you don't have copies, we can get you copies. But the statement of purpose, I am going to read that. The Police Accountability Board Alliance was formed by the Police Accountability Board Organizing Committee, which in 2017 recommended to the Rochester City Council an ordinance establishing a Police Accountability Board. The purpose of the alliance is to nominate Rochester community members to represent the interests of civilian residents of the city of Rochester on the Rochester Police Accountability Board. And like I said previously, this will consist of the organizations which are listed in our bylaws and also on the website for EI. The membership will include nominated members by the alliance, which will then be, they have to submit applications. They have to be interviewed by the executive committee, which will be chosen from the members of the Board of Alliance for the PAB. At the first meeting, Alliance members shall nominate and elect 5 individuals to serve as the executive committee. The responsibilities of the executive committee will be to convene meetings of the Alliance, maintain the records of the Alliance, communicate with Police Accountability Board related to board vacancies, manage the board nomination process, and monitor Alliance membership participation, and design a process to seat new members should someone vacate a position. In the bylaws, there is a nomination process. There are A through H, which I will not read verbatim, but the nominating committee will, of course, submit applications for nominees to fill 6 positions on the PAB, the Police Accountability Board. Then those applications will be viewed by the executive committee. The executive committee will screen the nominee submissions, narrow that down to 12 finalists. Then they'll call a meeting to input with input regarding qualifications of the finalists. After a review of the input, by a 4/5 vote, they will determine the final 6 nominees and submit that to the City Council for confirmation and appointment. If the City Council rejects the nominee, then there will be a replacement recommended by the Executive Committee. The finalists will be, the final list of community appointments shall not be published until all 6 nominees are confirmed. And then the Alliance appointees to the Police Accountability Board will serve terms in accordance with the City Council ordinance. The other articles are a subsequent nomination process, new members, and indemnification, and of course, the effective date of the bylaws, which I will not read those on your own. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much it. Like every good organization, bylaws are important, and so that everybody will be on the same page. Everybody who's a part of this will have a copy of the bylaws, and we'll adhere to such bylaws.
Question, I think, I don't know this right, did you say that the city council has, veto power over people that might be appointed, or might be belong to the other process?
Yes,
What do you think behind that?
Yeah, if I could, so the way it works is the alliance nominates members to the police accountability board, to city council. And so city council is supposed to appoint those to the board. Theoretically, if they did not appoint those to the board and they rejected them, they would then, according to our police accountability board ordinance, they're supposed to send a reason why they've rejected that person to the alliance, and then the alliance gets to nominate a new person. So ultimately, it does in some way require city council's consent to get them to actually be appointed to the board, but only the alliance itself can nominate. If they reject someone, the alliance has to then nominate a new person to fill that role.
Some of us aren't their political friends all the time, so I just wonder if that could be, I mean, I know you can't reject anyone, but they have to have some.
What basis would they be able to rely on to reject an applicant?
Yeah,
Sorry?
I mean,
So you're working, you said?
Yeah, well, we're gonna work on that criteria. That's kind of what we
I
talked
mean,
about.
so it's, I mean, city council is a political, branch of office, right? I mean, it's, so what could they do? Theoretically, they could do whatever they want. Like we don't have control over that aspect of things. That said, given, I think the best, so the alternative is to allow city council to sort of pick whoever they want. What we're trying to do is avoid that problem of them just, city council is comfortable and wants to maintain the status quo, so they just pick whoever they want. Whereas the way we've proposed it, it's the community groups in the alliance get to nominate people to fill those roles. If city council were to reject someone, we could put political pressure on them to allow them to get, press. So if the reasons that they're providing that aren't comporting with, general reasonableness, we can put the way we could actually try to affect change in that situation is political pressure. It's not going to be, trying to enforce this law, through the alliance. It's going to be political pressure for them being unreasonable, which we've expressed in some other ways related to, for example, the training that we were able to get city council to withhold funding. So, for example, the police union tried to bring in force science training. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that situation, but essentially, there's a guy who testifies on behalf of police officers who have been accused of brutality all around the country, and a lot of times he testifies on behalf of officers, saying how they were justified in shooting people, for example, in the back, because they could have been turning around really fast and they might have had a gun. That's just an example of the sort of argument this guy makes. Now, the Rochester Police Union is trying to get this guy to come in to Rochester to train officers, and it actually got city council to give them, thousands of dollars in funding, to help get people trained by this gentleman. So we brought this to city council's attention. We said, hey, this guy has a problem. The city should not be paying for this. And they, based on that political pressure we put on them, they revoked the funding that they had offered to the police union to pay for this. So political pressure can work if city council's acting unreasonably. It's not a be-all end-all solution to every possible problem that could arise. But I think using the alliance and the community to nominate individuals to the board is the best protection we have for how to get the community represented on the board itself.
And on top of that, the city council will have 4 choices of their own. It's going to be 11 people, 6 from the alliance, the community, then 4 from city council, and then the mayor will appoint 1 person to the board. So hopefully we don't get too much pushback from the community members because they have 4 of their own people that they get to choose for this police accountability board.
This is a very emotional, difficult issue. And you're going to, I would expect you to get people who aren't going to just sit there and be little folks all the time. And so I'm not saying he might be obnoxious, but I think, the nature of this issue, they have to be willing to take criticism. The city council does. And take it seriously and be able to, maybe that, you probably will already have that conversation with them or have had it, will
Well, that's why we have it for the community, so make sure they do have the right kind of people, and it's gonna be like, up to you. You gotta know the person you're putting up there on the board.
But like, sometimes elected people don't want to, and I'm just speaking to the fact that they have some, I'll just say, loose people about, you know, I understand this is not an easy issue, because you have, you're saying two ways to go on that. But, and, you know, you want to figure out how to put pressure on them. Just don't guarantee, I've seen it happen, I've seen, you know, just tough, when you get these difficult issues, people want to be able to be honest and direct. Just for people who are hearing, they're used to hearing, it's wonderful, and
Is it possible to have a reasonably narrow list of reasons that they can reject appointee?
Well, they've got to have good cause to do it. I think it's in the ordinance. So if they don't have good cause to reject a nominee, then that's when we really need to step up the public campaign and put pressure on those councilors to say, you're being totally unreasonable, you're trying to block the process, you're not allowing the ordinance to work as it's supposed to work, and you have to do this. And if we have to shut down the phone lines to city council, storm the building, I mean, whatever it takes, if you have to be ready to do that work in the streets to get people out to make them feel that sting, you know, I mean, that's just part of politics. But it's also like a power sharing thing, we're like, we can't go to city council and say, here's our ordinance, and we want everything, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, that's why we're like treating them as friends right now, and they're treating us like friends because it feels conciliatory in some ways. Like, they understand that there's a real big problem, and they understand that we have a solution, and they want to try to get as close to a amicable solution as they can. And until that changes, that's how we're proceeding as like a political entity. Yeah. So.
And like AJ said, the funding has to come from city
City
council.
council. Right.
Yeah, the funding for this has to come from city
It's gonna save them. I
council.
mean,
Well, this is gonna save them money.
They'll be able to reduce the number of PSS people, and attacking PSS will come up with the money you're asking for this. Even if it reduces none of the payouts in the first year, which it might not.
Could I get like a thin slice of the current quote community groups and maybe what we anticipate moving forward as like community groups? Like all I can think of in my head is churches, and then past that I'm like kind of stuck.
ABC, Urban League.
You want me to read them off?
Do you have it? Yeah.
19th Ward Neighborhood Association, African American Health Coalition, Beatrice LeBron 25th Legislative District, Beechwood Neighborhood Association, Black Student Leadership Association, the Catholic Family Center, Citizen Action of New York, Colgate Rochester Cozier Divinity School, Dimitri House, Dr. Samuel Walker, expert in civil liberties, policing and criminal justice, the DUPC Justice Team, Enough is Enough, Facing Race, Embracing Equity, Flower City Parents Network, the Flying Squirrel Community Space, Gandhi Institute, Greater Rochester Community of Churches, Hillside Children's Center, Ibero-American Action League, Interfaith Gospel Tabernacle, Judicial Process Commission, Latino Health Coalition, Metro Justice, Mount Hope Family Center, National Coalition Building Institute, National Lawyers Guild of New Jersey and Delaware, NJ/DE.
Yeah, so they handle the prisoner legal action network across all of New York State as well. So,
Does that give you a good idea?
Yeah, that's just-
There's, yeah.
so
Several
there
others.
are some churches involved, but not just churches.
Cleveland Local Organization,
Downtown United
Downtown
Presbyterian.
United Presbyterian Church,
I knew it sounded. Thank you.
and several others.
Yeah.
So,
So CGR was finished at the end of September of 2017. City Council, the city of Rochester released it at the end of November 2017. And that was enough, read it. And there were some things we didn't like about it. So we wrote this response to it. And we're going to be making this response public on February 20th. And we're looking for people to join us at the press conference. It's going to be at 11 o'clock on February 20th at Downtown United Presbyterian Church. There will be press releases, you'll see information about this. There are two primary problems that we found with the report. Number one is on page 4 of the CGR report, they basically make a claim that, well, I can read to you directly here. Discipline of police officers is governed by state civil service law, there's a footnote 4, and local collective bargaining agreements. State civil service law specifies that the police chief must make final disciplinary decisions and that discipline of specific officers cannot be publicly reviewed. So at the footnote there, they cite New York State Civil Rights Law 50A, right? And so that's just patently wrong. New York State Civil Rights Law 50A, as AJ explained, prevents the dissemination publicly of officer personnel files, records, right? But it doesn't specify anywhere in Article 50A, if you read the whole law, anything about disciplining officers or who gets to discipline officers or how officers are disciplined, right? That falls under the purview of Article 75 of civil service law. So that was a big flag, and then they actually, in 3 other instances in their report, they cite this but don't actually put a footnote. They just mention state law prevents anything from happening, so we were concerned about that. We went back and looked at Article 75 because that seemed to be the appropriate law they were meaning to cite. And basically, that law says the hearing upon such charges shall be held by the officer or body having the power to remove the person against whom such charges are preferred or by a deputy or other person designated by such officer or body, and then officer or body. I'm reading the black parts, the other parts. Be referred to an officer or body. The persons or persons holding such a hearing shall be an officer or a body. Basically, what Article 75 says is that it is not state law that says the chief of police is the only person who can discipline police officers. It says an officer or a body of a municipality, such as our proposed police accountability board, could do that work, right? Could discipline officers. The one hiccup with that, obviously, is the collective bargaining agreement between the city of Rochester and the Rochester Police Locust Club. And that's currently in negotiations, and it's been in negotiations for 2-3 years now. So we're hoping the city will finally be satisfied that they can do this, and then put some power behind those negotiations and change them to incorporate the PAB into that. So that was one thing, just the state law issue was bandied about by city councilors to us, it was in CGR, and we're still researching this topic, but looking at different case law and looking at how things have, reading the law is number one. Read the law. Always read the law. Ask them where they get it from. It says nothing that they're saying. It doesn't say anything about the chief of police having some discretionary power over disciplining of officers. So that was one problem we found. They miscited a law, and then they actually, in the text of the report, made a factual error. And so we brought that to their attention. Another thing we brought to their attention was, at the end of the report was a bar graph showing the sustain rates for 4 cities. It was Rochester, Albany, New York City, and Syracuse. And we looked at Syracuse and Rochester because they tended to focus more on that in their report. And we found out, first of all, that Syracuse only looks at civilian-initiated complaints of use of force, or allegations of misconduct, right? Our report, the one I talked about at the beginning, looked at allegations of force. So we looked at citizen-initiated allegations of force and went through 4 years of sustained rates for each of those cities. And the average for Rochester was 7%, and for Syracuse it was 28%. Sorry, I have so much here. The other thing we looked at is civilian-initiated allegations of all misconduct, right? And so we found that, looking at Syracuse and Rochester, Syracuse actually sustains 4 times higher than Rochester over 4 years. And one of the things that we are thinking is that because Syracuse is independent investigative authority, this gives them the opportunity to look and ask questions that otherwise might not be answered or asked by a police department doing the only investigation. We brought this to CGR's attention. We told them that basically, the Citizen Review Board in Syracuse does not look at internal complaints to the police department or internal review of complaints of police misconduct. And they said that they would change that and send a memorandum to city council, but they weren't going to change anything else. Anyways, those are the two major points of the response. And it's just to say that we're going to be having this press conference. We're going to use this as an opportunity to educate the public and to bring forth some of these issues that have been thrown up in the past as, blocks to what we're proposing, and we actually don't think that they're blocks at all.
What time
What
did
time
you
is
say?
it?
Oh, 11 o'clock?
That was my question.
Okay.